Welcome to Ulua. You live, you work, you art.
Hello, good afternoon here. It's super hot in the city of Buenos Aires. It's 32 Celsius degrees. Even with the air conditioning, it's unbearable. So in this episode, we will talk about languages. And as I have said in previous episode, one of the main reasons that I started this podcast is because I was already forgetting or losing my fluency in English because it's been 2 years in a row since I last spoke English as a daily basis. So you tend to forget things. And English is my first second language that I learned. I learned others too. For example, Arabic, I have almost completely lost it because I haven't practiced it for 15 years or more. And also, well, Indonesian I learned also 5 years ago, a little bit sedikit Indonesian I speak. Um, and what else? I've learned also Portuguese. It's kind of similar to Spanish, but it also has some tricky parts for itself. And I think that's it. And my native language is Spanish. And I want to talk to you about why learning at least a second language is important for you, for your career, and also for the main interest that at least I have here for this podcast is for you to think differently, to think said better. I don't know. Um, just I want to say also that just by having a second language, it doesn't mean that you will automatically improve your thinking. Now it's not like that, but having at least a second language, you can start to think differently. And also, for example, Spanish speakers always said about thinking in English, but you can't accomplish that until you have certain vocabulary, certain structures, and also some practice about the language because it needs to be part of your body, your mind, your soul, your brain. So I think it takes some time when you start learning a second language until you have, I said, certain practice or certain abilities, then you can start thinking, you could say, in the other language. And when you have that, I know many people, not only me, but I know many people that are, for example, working all day with people speaking English and they forget their native language sometimes. It also happened to me when I came back from Indonesia that I have so many things that I had incorporated there. And I remember going to the supermarket and trying to, I have in my body also saying terima kasih and that kind of thing. And I still sometimes have that. And because it becomes part of you. The more you speak the language, it becomes more part of yourself. And for example, I know the case where my partner sometimes he's all the time speaking in English, and he's I think he even speaks more. He speaks better in English than in Spanish. Even he's a native in Spanish. Because sometimes when we speak frequently in another language, for example, one of the structures that, even though in Spanish some structures are also existent but are not used in common language, or we don't use passive voice, which is mostly used in English. So that kind of thing, when he's, for example, talking, sometimes he makes so many mistakes in Spanish uh, because he's somehow trying to convert it into Spanish from English. So that kind of thing happens, and the more languages you know, it's more complicated. I remember when I was learning Portuguese also that I confused things in Portuguese, in English, and Spanish, and I made a mixture of them too. And I know many people say, "Oh, it's because you want to brag that you have many languages." It's nothing like that. It's just your mind or your brain mixing up things, and it's actually there are several scientific studies about that, and um, it is a thing because in the 50s, for example, people who knew different languages uh, they were considered disabled or handicapped because they were mixing words uh, or they had mistakes of the concept they were talking about because they were trying to translate into their mind and their brain from one language to the other. So, for example, this podcast, as I said, I started speaking in English because I wanted to practice my English because it was getting so rusty, and I really, even though I could, I still continue to listen to English all day, and I listen to podcasts in English and watch movies directly in English and everything. I wasn't talking in English, so I wasn't speaking in English, so it comes like um, you get your fluency is lost in time, and yeah, and actually I was listening again some of the previous episodes, and I say how many mistakes I have done. For example, I wanted to say look after, I say look at, those kind of things that you when you lose practice, you lose those kind um, of words or vocabulary. So yeah. And also, I had trouble saying categories, and I say categories. I think I don't know. I mix things, or for example, the other day I say emphatic, and I wasn't sure if it was empathic or empathetic. And well, I have to look up those things. But yeah, if you are a native English, please have patience with my English. Um, so yeah. So the main thing I want to say in this episode is why is it important to learn a second language? Even in the 50s, it was considered that you were disabled or handicapped if you had this ability to transform one language into the other. And what I've experienced, and I've read a lot about because I'm kind of obsessed with, well, with many topics, but one of them is language and how language shapes our mind. Um, the more languages you learn, the more languages you also, because when you learn a language, you become immersed in the culture because you have to understand how the language is used and what context. And every language has their own particularities. For example, uh, I've been reading a book mm, uh, about language structures and that kind of thing around the world. And for example, one curious thing is that the Eskimo people they have, for example, in their languages they have words that they use to just with one word. For example, they can say, "I saw your cousin the other day fishing in that pond of ice." I don't know, that kind of thing. It was a super long sentence for us speaking in English or Spanish, and it was just one word that I had. So For me, that's amazing. I don't know. I like it. I think it's super curious and super nice to know this kind of thing. And I can't actually imagine how they are thinking just to have one word for all the things they are saying. But I think it makes me wonder how they are thinking, or what's the way of thinking in their particular context. Imagine living in the middle of the ice all year long, almost, and the things they do and everything that shapes the languages, and also I think that shapes their minds. Another nice fact for you to learn English, at least there's a study that says that if you learn, sorry, not English, but another language, a second language, you are somehow retarding um, approximately 4 to 5 years for dementia and Alzheimer's, because your brain has to work even more, especially if you're an adult and you're trying to learn a second language. You will understand that. You will understand what I'm saying, because you have to think more and you have to put the effort to understand how the structures and the grammar and the words function. Sometimes even a completely different alphabet, um, how things are combined, accents, uh, everything is creating new associations in your brain, and you are forming more neural links inside of your brain. And well, as any muscle, the brain, the more it exercises, the stronger it gets. So I think it's just with these things that I've told you, I think they are kind of like worth trying. I don't know if you are a bilingual person, or if um, you are, if you can think in another language, if you have had the opportunity to think about these things. Because, for example, when you when you learn what I find is that the more languages you learn, the more easy it is to start getting another language and another language, because you start to see patterns. For example, when I studied Arabic, sorry, I had um, I had a friend who was studying also with me, and he knew French. For example, I don't know about French. I can talk French. I can understand it somehow, but I can't speak any French. But he did, and he did, and also did speak. He was a native Spanish, had French, and also English. So we were studying Arabic, and I could see how he could understand even more things than me, or he could associate, oh, this is like in French like that, and this is in English like that, and we made those associations, and he had even more insights than I had, because he also spoke French. And what I've seen so far is that the more languages you learn, it is easier for you to incorporate another one, and for you to see patterns. To see patterns not only about the language or the structures or the grammar or the pronunciation even, but also seeing patterns about how we are as human beings, I could say. Because somehow I cannot say I totally understand how people, for example, or Arab people think, but I somehow, through language, you can understand certain behaviors and certain ways of, yeah, I don't know, thinking, living, I could say. Also in Spanish, the same. Uh, for example, it is said that uh, Spanish are more emotional people, And I think it's also because of our language, um, or Portuguese, similar. We have like I I don't know exactly why, but I can totally understand that why the language is more like romantic or dramatic also. So for me personally, thinking in English has helped me take a little bit out the drama, um, the drama of the Spanish people, and for example, while learning Arabic, I think it's I don't know about Chinese, for example. I would love to learn Chinese. I haven't put to that yet. But I think those are like languages, even when you hear them talk, it's totally different. It's like, for example, Chinese is like, uh, let's say, golpes, like strikes, right? It's like all the syllables are like, this is like the rhythm. I don't know any Chinese, so please correct me if you know, but that's what I see from the outside. And in Portuguese, for example, they have like a certain cadence or like a certain, even you could say that like they are kind of dancing. I don't know. Um, and I could see that also. I had a teacher, a Portuguese teacher. She was from Brazil, um, and she speaks perfectly Spanish because she has been living here for almost like 15 years or more. And when she speaks Spanish, it's like a completely different person. And when she speaks Portuguese, she's uh, and with the rhythm and everything. When she speaks Spanish, she's like an Argentinian, you could say. She speaks like, and I could see her changing between those two languages. And because she showed us that she could speak perfect Spanish, and when she changed between those the two languages, she was like a totally different person. It was like she was, I don't know, two persons in one. And I feel that I can also relate to that when I'm speaking English. Um, as I said before, I think in your mind when you are thinking in another language, it's like you have always almost forgotten about your native language even. Um, so that's why I think it's also difficult to translate, because I remember when I was studying English, I was a young lady, and people say, "Oh, but say something in English." I didn't know what to say, um, because it's not like, I don't know. It's like two different things. From it's like you put it's almost like you turn off and on a switch in your mind, and you start speaking in English or you start speaking in Spanish. And I can do the transition, of course. But I think speaking in English or thinking in English, being able to think in English, has helped me uh, understand those patterns. As I said, patterns not only about language, but about um, thinking. Sometimes, if I want to, this has also been proved through studies that if you think in your second language, you take out all the emotional baggage, because in your native language is the one that you talk with your parents, with your family, with the people that you love, you could say, or you live with. So you tend to be more emotional in your native language. So it's not only Spanish, but in your native language, you have all the emotions because you have grown with that language. And so when I try to be rational and maybe not artistic, I try to think the things I need to solve or I need to come up with. So I think in English about the problem that I have or about the things that I need to solve. I prefer to think about that in English. And I am actually realizing about that I think more artistically in Spanish. I hadn't thought about that. So thank you for being here. And interesting. We can talk about decision making and language in another episode because there are, well, decision making is not only um, influenced by your language, but also about context you're in, environment you're in. If you're a guy or a girl, that also influences the way you decide, at least according to some papers. So yeah, we can talk about that later. But what I do know is that having this, at least as I said, a second language, you can start to see things in a different way. So maybe your problem solving will be also increased if you learn to speak other languages. Another thing I found is that there is also some kind of art when you learn another language. For example, I kind of wanting to learn Chinese now, as I said, and I think that maybe Chinese, Japanese, those languages, also Arabic, they have different writing, so that also changes your perception, your way of, even Arabic, for example. In Spanish and in English, we write from left. I don't know what's your left, but this is my left, left to right. And in Arabic, you write from right to left. So even that changes your perception of. I remember when I was studying, um, even writing was like at first it was actually not that a challenge as people think. They think, oh, calligraphy in Arabic is the most difficult part. And just for writing purposes, for getting out your words, it's not that difficult. What I found most difficult from Arabic is the pronunciation, and they have, I don't know if I would say unique um, vocal and also guttural. I don't know if you can say guttural in English. It comes from deeper in your lungs. Even the sounds, they are like funny in Spanish, and we don't have those sounds in Spanish. So that's really interesting. And it changes you because you have to practice and you have to do certain movements even to get those little, those sounds out. And in your native language, you just don't think about that. You just talk because that's how you have learned from childhood. And yeah, that is also interesting because when you speak a second language or foreign language, um, I don't know about now because I've seen people speaking really good, even if they have learned as adults. But I've heard that until the age of 7, if you learn, for example, I don't know, Arabic and Spanish, that some have, for example, Arabic has these unique sounds that Spanish doesn't have. If you learn as a child, your vocal cords will be developed so the sound comes perfectly in the language. But if you learn as an adult, it might be more difficult to do that. So, as I was saying, learning a second language not only helps your body, not only modifies your body, but also modifies your thinking and your way of behaving. And for, as I said before, when I was in Indonesia, I learned sedikit Indonesian, a little bit, and it also changed. It was that was clear how it changed my body too, because I was immersed in the culture, and when you're speaking or you are there, they have certain rules that, for example, here in Argentina we don't have, like the bowing. Uh, Everything's like more, I would say, like a protocol, or like have certain rituals. For example, I remember somebody gave me their card, their business card. I don't have anything like that here, but I have this paper, nothing to do with that. And they, for example, they want to give you their card and say everything is like, even that I was doing at the time when I came back to Argentina, and I felt awkward for the first month or so, because I tend to also immerse with all my body and soul into the culture. So yeah, and for example, when this is another side note that I found interesting. When I came back to Argentina, we here are like big
Big.
puteadores. It's like we have this I don't know, this custom of us that we um, insult, but it's not in a bad way. It's just something we do. It depends. For example, here in Spanish, yes, that is important. It depends on the level of the voice, also the language of the body. If somebody is insulting you, maybe they are their friend is just like insulting you, but in a good way. It's not bad, actually. It's considered like they're familiar with you, that they love you, or anything like that. And it's not really an insult. But if you say the same words, maybe like angry or shouting at someone, it has a completely different meaning. So in that case, it's like you are totally furious and you're teasing other people and you're angry at them. And when I came back at the airport, I heard somebody shouting out huge insults, and from what I could gather about the situation is that he dropped something. As he said something like, "I don't want to repeat that here." And I felt like, oh, I was missing that so much, even if it was an insult. Because in Indonesia, people are super nice and they don't insult others. They are all the time smiling. And even though speaking with an Indonesian, I don't know who told me that it was Chandra. I don't remember exactly, but at work, somebody told me, yes, we are all the time saying, yes, yes, we are happy all the time, but we have a passive aggressive behavior. For example, if I'm angry at you, I will say, oh, yes, yes. But then I will go out and maybe slam the door, or maybe, I don't know, like take things out or that kind of thing. I found that really interesting also. Um, so yeah, as I was saying, it changes your body. It changes. I don't know if just language changes your body. Maybe also culture you're immersed in. Um, but also it for sure. Well, there are many theories, but I think languages can change your mind. I adhere to that. Maybe not 100%, but they can change you because, as I was saying, you start to think differently. You start to have certain patterns of thinking. Maybe you are more direct. I heard, for example, I don't know how to speak in Dutch, but I know that people who speak Dutch are more direct and they're concise and they go to the point. Even when they make decisions, they are like just decision made. They are like quick things. That's what I heard from Dutch people, Dutch girl. And in Spanish, people tend to, as you may listen to me, that I ramble a lot, and we tend to delay decisions. This is general, of course. Not everyone is the same, and some we have to learn how to make better decisions and that kind of thing. But for example, for me as a native in Spanish speaker, learning English and also be able to think in English, as I said, it has helped me be more precise, or at least even more precise than Spanish in my decisions, and also in the things I want to communicate. So I became a little more direct than I would normally be in Spanish, and there are even some things that I would say English has taken over my native language in some things that I sometimes just automatically decide how what things I would think in English and what things I would think in Spanish. Uh, so it's just like some kind of automatic, that kind of thing. And about patterns, for example, in even vocabulary, when I mentioned, for example, about the sounds that are particular to Arabic, I'm not sure they are unique for Arabic. I don't know. Because I've heard some people saying that there are no unique sounds, that all the sounds come from another, maybe ancient language, so it might be shared with other civilizations and things we don't know. But you can find that there are several sounds that are spoken in Arabic and are also spoken in French, and maybe not in Spanish, but yes, in Malay, or I don't know. But you can go connecting those sounds between languages. And another thing is that you can remember that we said in the past episode about you doing you, but also trying to understand other people's thinking or way of thinking. Understanding the language of a particular culture also helps you start a little bit to think like them, and also understand why they do the things they do and why they behave like that, why they think like that, what is their background. Um, I will give you an example. I think, for example, in Indonesia, as I was saying, they say that they are quiet people, and that they tend to simplify maybe things sometimes. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, so please bear with me with this idea. For example, when they want to say parks, two or more parks, they don't have this concept like we do maybe in Spanish, that we say parques and we add, for example, an S to express plural. For them, is to repeat the word. For example, taman is parques, because taman is one park. So that's really interesting to understand. And or for example, orang is a person, and orang is people. And I found that's really interesting. For example, in English, you have person and then people. Like two completely different words. And as I said, in Spanish, we just add one S to express plural. So I think that that has two impacts on how you think and how how you live your life. Um, but anyways, and I maybe the only pure languages we can say are the ones that are man-made. Well, maybe they're not all man-made, but I mean the ones that have been invented or created recently for certain purposes. And we can talk about that in another episode. I don't want to go into that right now, but I think that maybe they are the only pure languages because, as I was saying, every language has influence for another one. I know English has many words that come from French, but they have been modified and shaped into what is now English. Also from uh, German or even before Germany, maybe those Germanic tribes and that kind of thing. And I know, for example, in India, and that was really amazing for me because I had several friends from India, but they are from different regions. So, for example, I have friends from Kerala and friends from Pune and friends from Delhi, and sometimes they have different languages. So, if they are all together in the same room, they don't understand each other. They have to speak in English. That was my experience with them, and I found that wow, that's interesting. It also happens in Indonesia, where, for example, if they have some particular, I can't remember the name of the sub languages, I will call it, um, where, for example, if you went to Bali, they speak some different Indonesian, maybe it's Sudanese, or in Jakarta they have Javanese, that kind of thing. Different island they have different uh, sub languages, and I think here I'm making just an encyclopedia of all the facts that I've been gathering, but I think it's also important for you to think about how languages are work and shape our minds. Because I'm remembering now, Indonesian comes from the Malay. Indonesia is like Hindi in India. It's um, like um, like a glue. Actually, as I said, in India, it's more English. It's like a glue that unites all the different regions. And in Indonesia, is Indonesian, which comes from the Malay. So when I was there, uh, I found out that I could still remember some words from Arabic that are also in Malay language and have been infused into Indonesian with a mixture of maybe Dutch and another thing. But so actually, I already knew some words in Indonesian because I had already studied Arabic. So yeah, that's super interesting, and you start to connect these things that seem at first completely unrelated. But I don't know. I find that interesting. Maybe you don't. So please tell me what you think about that in the comments. Um, and yeah, well, that was my experience with languages and a little bit of how I view that. Um, let me know what you think in the comments, and I hope you like this episode. Muito obrigada, gracias, terima kasih, thank you, and shukran. So have fun. Bye. See you in the next episode.
Stay tuned for Ulua's next episode.